Welcome to Low Code Campfire number 97, and I am your host for today. Dale is not here, and as you can see, Dale cleverly made the topic today, Ask Patrick. So I don't know if that means you need to ask Patrick what the topic is, or you're asking Patrick questions, but I think it's the latter. So just a quick overview of Campfire. We meet at Fridays at 10 a.m. Central, and we're just a gathering of people who use PlantAnApp, and we come together to help each other out and to share our challenges and to give help where we can to others who are struggling. So we encourage you to be ready to help and to give ideas and suggestions. All the webinars are recorded, as is this one currently being recorded. And you can subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get notifications when the recordings are posted by scanning this QR code here. Our agenda is always pretty simple. We start with some introductions, and then we have around the campfire a first call for anybody who wants to jump in and start the conversation with assistance on something. If we have any new campfire contributions, we'll take a look at those, and same with the community feature requests. We don't have any submitted topics today, but topics can be submitted ahead of time, and I'll show you in a second how to do that. And at the end, we have a section we call Ghost Stories and Dark Corners, where you can just share something mysterious that happened with you this week with PlantAnApp. And then we stop the recording at the end, and anybody who wants to can stay behind, and we can have a more relaxed conversation. So we encourage you to jump in, bring something to share with others, and you can interact with us either by using the chat window, raising your hand, or unmuting. Guidelines are simple. If you have a lot of noise going on, mute yourself, and please be courteous to each other. You can submit questions ahead of time. You can scan this QR code here and submit your questions ahead of time, and we'll be sure to include them in the agenda for the call. So with that, I'll pause, and we'll go into the introductions there, part of the call. So I'm Patrick. Hi, everybody.
Good morning, everyone.
I don't see anybody new as yet. Yeah, good morning. And I don't see anybody that, oh yes, Jim is here. So we have to say good afternoon to Jim.
Good afternoon.
Always appreciated.
Cool. All right, with that, we'll move into the first call. Does anybody have any burning questions?
I have what I hope is a quick thing for somebody.
Oh, sure.
Is there a place where the conditional statements are documented, like what the syntax is, what's the format?
Yeah, actually, we should have that. Have you looked at learn.plantanapp.com?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. And what is your question specifically about it?
Yes, I have an error that I'm getting, a ton of them, and it's I've got a grid where I show links to files that were uploaded in a previous form, and the mechanism is on the grid. It's a text item that has a tiny bit of HTML that says get link file identifier equals the code that's in the field. Right. But if there was nothing uploaded, then that code is, well, I don't know what it is. It's either 0 or null. I'm not sure what PlantAnApp calls it. So I'm not sure what the value should be in the cell condition that says don't bother displaying it, don't run that code, don't get the error from get link if there's no file ID in that field. So what I'm trying to do is write the field name result file. If there's no file ID in there, what should that string in the cell condition be to stop it from trying to run the get link code?
So what I've always used that seems to work well is just simply the field ID does not equal empty quotes. That usually works for me pretty well. But I'm guessing you probably tried that.
So bracket field name, not
exclamation point equal,
and then single quotes.
Yep, single or double quotes. Yep.
That's it.
That's usually what I do.
When it's even when it's a number, the field is an integer.
Right. So it should. But if you don't have a file ID stored, it should be returning an empty string. That's what I've found. Has anybody found anything different than that? Okay.
Yeah, well, that's all good, and I'll give that a try. And
Yeah.
but I figured while I was asking it, it would be a great thing to see, you know, what is the syntax and where and what does one do for those kinds of things. Certainly would help the low and no code developers when they're putting something together to know what exactly to write in there, as opposed to, you know, me, like, wasn't sure knowing.
Yeah. So I guess
of how you could do it. What should you do?
Yeah, and I hear you. So yeah, I'm looking at the common parameters article on learn.plantanet.com, and it just gives an example, just, you know, a single example of a and so, but there are certainly a lot of different scenarios that you know, that could come up. And, you know, it does indicate that it's a Boolean expression. So that's one thing that's important, is to, you know, and that's what I've done often is just go and find Boolean syntax. But I think what would be an improvement is to actually link to a good article about Boolean syntax. That would be a good idea for us to include.
That'd be great. Yeah, something that wherever you know, wherever you got it from, basically, right?
Yeah.
Would be fine. I don't need anybody to rewrite all of that if it's already, and it obviously is already out there. But I mean, my first thought was like not null or something like that, because it is an integer and it does allow for null, and that's it says write that in the SQL console. So the first thought is, well, maybe it has to be a not null sequence, but I wasn't sure if not null was something in Boolean, or if it was because SQL would write that. You'd do that in SQL, but that doesn't mean you would do that in this logic, right, where this is. Jim was saying about JavaScript that follow the Boolean parameters of JavaScript. So maybe that's the thing to do. I don't know, but I don't know what it is. So it helps build up the confidence of people that are trying out the product. That's kind of my my thought on it.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to pitch it at the no-code developer to say it follows the JavaScript syntax is probably not that helpful. I think having the examples for common situations, like you say, how do I test for a blank? How do I test for a number? How do I test for, you know, how do I combine Boolean without, you know, that's assuming people know what Boolean logic is. How do I check for two things? How do I check for or? I think a couple of examples for those sorts of common situations, and then, as you say, a link would be helpful, because I think very often people assume it's more complicated than it is. Because ultimately, I think because it's front end, it's all being resolved down to Angular, and it's primarily strings that we're manipulating or working with by the time you get to the conditional logic.
Right.
I just want to jump in and say, because a lot of, excuse my voice, a lot of people don't realize this.
Ben, just 1 second. We're getting a lot of feedback from you.
It's not
or
me.
Maybe it's
I think
somebody
it's Jim.
Oh, okay. All
ever.
right. Yep. There we go. Yep. That's better now.
The conditional statement, because that is run at the time the form loads, it's run at the server and therefore uses C# code. When you use a binding expression, that conditional statement runs at the client and therefore runs on Java code. Syntax is significantly different. For example, the one that always catches me, index of.
Mm-hmm.
If you use
That is very
index
true.
of on a conditional statement, it's capital I for the word index. However, if you use that same copy and paste it into your binding expression, it will fail because it's case sensitive. The I must be lowercase in JavaScript. So there is a significant difference in syntax. You have to make sure you're using the correct syntax depending on whether you're doing a conditional or a binding.
And sometimes they're just different words, like string.contains. I can't remember which the other word is, but you in one you can do string.contains, and in the other one it's something else, and I can't remember what it is. But so there's definitely those considerations as well, whether or not the Boolean expression is running on server side or running front end. That makes a big difference. Exactly right.
Yeah, Ben, that distinction helps quite a bit. My point, and pretty much to what Jim said earlier, I've been writing code for 40 years, just not this code. So, it's a language. You need to know the language, so you need a dictionary. You need something like that, and I think it would certainly help adoption of this product that we've invested so heavily in. Make it a little easier for somebody new to come in, so that new people will come in. But thanks, that helps tremendously, and hopefully get that 950 errors that I have, because it does it for every single cell of every single row of this grid that I have. I get an error for it, so I have to clear that out.
Anybody else? Ben, yeah, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah. This is not so much of a question as much as a resolution to a question from last week. I had posed a question regarding accessing Oracle data, and I was having a horrible time. I mean, I literally went through like 6 different, completely different iterations of attempting to access Oracle data, whether it be through a SQL action, whether it be through a my token, whether it be through SQL to entity, and each one posed their own significant but problematic errors. For example, like my tokens, and as well as creating an entity from a SQL statement has a 10-second hard-coded timeout. So if your SQL statement does not complete and return data within 10 seconds, it times out, which then just kills everything that comes further down the line. A regular SQL statement action has the ability to override it. It has a default of 10 minutes, but you can extend that. The only thing is, by using that type of scenario, you can't really return something that you can iterate through. So you're limited at that point, if you use that action, to dump all the information into a table and then use something else to iterate through your table. Ultimately, Dale came up with a suggestion to attempt accessing the Oracle data directly through a Razor script. And that was the answer. It took me a little while to figure out which DLLs to include, and the right syntax to use in the script itself. However, the best case that I had done prior was using a SQL statement, dumping the data from Oracle into a local SQL table, and then processing the SQL table locally. Doing that, and even that was limited because I still had to paginate the data from the local table, because I had millions of records. It was still too much for even a SQL to entity using the local table to handle. It was more than 10 seconds. So I was paginating somewhere in the vicinity of like 1 to 2 million records at a time. Even using that method, I was over 30 minutes of processing time to get that written out to a file and process it. Using the razor script method and just doing it directly, I took what was 7.5 million records, taken about 30 minutes. By the time I was done, 8.6 million records, because it's continually increasing, now runs in 4 minutes. So it was a significant increase in performance. Still takes a while, but it's understandable because it is a large amount of data. But for anyone else that is trying to access data outside of the local table and hitting against limitations with regards to timeouts and whatnot, that really is going to be your best bet, is to use a razor script and access the data using data objects directly. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks,
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for following up with that. Does anyone have any thoughts, other thoughts or questions for Ben on that?
Just Ben, do you want to post a sample of your script?
Wait, hold on. Jim, can you mute? Okay, Jim Anthony, can you ask that again?
Can you post a sample of your script that shows like what the DLLs and stuff that you had to load into that final script to get that process?
What I'll do is I'll try to because it's a very long script, I'll dumb it down, like just take out the most important pieces. So the DLLs that you have to include, as well as the syntax for the loop and how to open the data access protocol, as well as then looping through your SQL statement and its result set and whatnot. So yeah, I could definitely post that.
Thanks.
Cool. Jim, did you have a comment or question? Okay. Yep, Jim was gonna ask the same thing. He confirmed in chat. Cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question. Has anybody, well, actually, I've got two. Has anybody done a Twilio or Clickatel integration?
I use Twilio, but I didn't integrate it through this. It's integrated with another module that I purchased.
Yeah. How, just out of curiosity, how doesn't seem terribly difficult at all? Was that your experience in terms of integration?
Oh, like I said, I didn't integrate it with PlantAnApp. It was a built-in feature of another module I purchased. So,
okay.
I mean, Twilio is great, but yeah, I haven't integrated it directly. It's actually, if you ever do get an answer to that, loop me in on it, because that module that I purchased is actually the company went defunct. So I may be looking into doing that integration manually myself through PlantAnApp shortly anyway.
Okay.
And if memory serves, I believe there was a Campfire that incorporated Twilio. Patrick, do you remember that?
I think so. I think if yeah,
I think it's an early cafe.
Yeah.
Is it really?
And we use Twilio.
I looked for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something there.
All right, I'm gonna
Ask
see.
OpenAI, Matt.
I am. That's why I'm here.
You only think that's really Matt there on the screen.
Let's see. Cafe number 6. So that is very early.
Yeah. Okay.
Cafe number 18 has some SMS work in it. So I just went to, let me just pull this over so you guys can see. That makes much more sense. I just went to YouTube and I did a search right here. Went to our channel and did a search on on our channel, and so first started talking about it in Cafe 6, and then I'm not sure what. I mean, it's probably in here somewhere. I'm just not sure what we talked about there. But definitely Cafe number 18 talks about SMS. So yeah, I think definitely you can find some information in there. We use it for a few things. One thing I know that we use it for is when you guys enter a ticket and you say that it's a system down ticket, there's a whole group of us that all get text messages no matter the time that it's put in when that happens, and that's happening through that functionality.
That's good. Thank you. Second question. Do I get 2 questions or just 1?
You're allowed 2, and then that's the limit. You can't ask another one.
Thank you.
Just kidding.
I'll be quiet.
just joking.
That question his second question?
Oh, it might have been.
You guys are good. So in a form using SQL to load up for a you say a multiple choice drop down, I've had some difficulty using. In fact, I don't even know if it's supported if then else logic inside of a SQL. It's when I go to save it, it just simply complains. Then you're laughing.
SQL doesn't have. Well, yes. Let me put it this way.
Let's clarify. Properly formatted SQL logic with the begin, the end. It works in Management Studio.
Are you using you just said that you are using a begin and end. You're using the if then in combination with begin and end. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, sorry.
I'm not sure to what complexity that. So you know how in listings we have the SQL query and then we have the SQL advanced query. I actually really can't speak to the complexity of the SQL statement you can put into a drop down data source, but we don't have that option. You know, it's just the one option. And I know I've done some fairly complex SQL in there, but I'm not sure I've used something as complex as what you're saying. Jim might have some input on this. It looks like. Go ahead, Jim.
Brace yourselves. What we increasingly did was try and move all of our SQL logic out of PlantAnApp and into stored procedures and views, so you get the full power of SQL. So you write a stored procedure which has all your logic in, and just reference it in your drop-down lookup.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion there, and a view might even be that might really work well for you because it'll be more efficient too.
So the reason for this, and I've done both the stored procedures and views in that context. The reason for this, and maybe there's another way to approach it, but it appears that the SQL that gets the drop downs executes whenever it wants to, usually seemingly first. And sometimes it appears that let's say in this case, a cookie value that I'm writing from the previous screen isn't quite there yet, but the SQL runs, looks for the cookie value, fails, and then a wonderfully long error message comes up on the screen that basically, when you get right down to it, says it doesn't have what it needs to run the SQL. And so the if then else is, if the cookie's empty, maybe wait a couple of seconds or do something else, and don't throw up this huge pink error message. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Yeah,
if I could give you a suggestion. I found that the SQL statements in those dropdowns, they cannot be, well, I've had issues making them overly complex. I usually only ever put in there I'll put in a complex SQL statement, but not a script. So if then else, those are scripting commands. Those I find do not function very well in those dropdowns. You can use case statements, you can use if then kind of logic in your where clauses, things like that, but it's all got to be encapsulated in one select statement. Now, that being said, you still can do very complex SQL statements using scripting language, similar to like what Jim Everett was saying about doing stored procedures. Now, I did that a lot in the past. Now, my only dislike of doing that is when you create a stored procedure, it becomes a pain in the butt to then manage it in the future. You have to have SMS, you got to open it up, you got to open up your, stored procedure code, modify it, run it as an alter. It becomes a pain to make those modifications. What you can do is you can create a my token that is a database query, make it as complex as you want, and the final result that you bring back, turn it into like a coalesce. So it's bringing in one string with carriage line returns for each entry, and using the text / value methodology in what you're returning, and then just put that token as your SQL statement. That's going to go out, run your SQL, return that one string. That string gets dumped into there, and it's in the correct format for its text / value per row, per line. And then your dropdown just will populate based off of what's returned from that SQL.
That is a good idea. Thank you.
And then just to add to that, you were saying in some cases you would let's say, want the system to either pause or give some different message if certain information isn't available. If you go a step further and use two things, which is create your entire statement as a workflow and then create a token that calls that workflow, your workflow can add even more logic in finding and dealing with those situations where you don't have all of the parameters you need to run, and return whatever message you want to display in that dropdown. And then it can basically gracefully deal with those situations.
So first of all, it's a load of good ideas right there. But in the case of timing issues, like, excuse me, I was saying that, sometimes when I'm going from screen A to screen B, the cookie gets written that I need, and it's not there when that SQL fires off. I then essentially, in let's say the token or the workflow, put the SQL that says, if it doesn't exist, don't blow up on me, do something else. So I suppose that, I guess the question is, do you think that would address the issue of timing of something not being available at that instant?
It depends on where the data is coming from. Cookies are stored at the client machine, and the workflows are going to be run at the server. So you'd be passing over the cookie information, not a reference to it, but whatever was in that cookie. So if that cookie didn't exist at the time you called the workflow, you're basically SOL. You don't have the data, and that's just the end of it. So the only thing you're going to be able to do at that point in the workflow is handle the fact that you don't have the information gracefully, and perhaps return into your drop-down list something that says, error, missing data, please reload, something to that effect. The only other thing you can do is find a different methodology for storing that information. For example, store it into a table. And if you do something like that, then what you can do is, if let's say you're passing a field name to a record in a table that you're looking for, and you're looking for its paired value, then your workflow can look for that and say, if it doesn't find it, pause for 30, like half a second or whatever, and then try it again and pause for another half a second and keep trying until it finds the value. Give the system time to catch up if that's what's happening. But that's only available to you if the data is going to be somewhere where the server is going to be able to query it. So
Right.
cookies are not going to be an option for you.
Right.
I was
Thank
also
you.
wondering, is the form functional if the dropdown doesn't have any options in it? Is it functional? So so my question is going towards, should you be checking before the dropdown even gets a chance to load whether or not the cookie exists, like, during the form initialization or something like that? There's probably a use case for what you're doing. I'm just, putting the question out there.
Well, so the answer is, all right, your question was, is the form functional without it? Not really.
Okay.
However, one of the things, mostly what I'm trying to do is avoid a really nasty looking error message. So in that case, what I was going to do was put some conditional on the execution of the dropdown that says basically, if the cookie's not there or empty, don't do this, and then put up an error, put up some other message, or like a reload or something like that. In that case, depending on, I've got a couple of different situations where it's slightly different, but the same concept.
Is this happening all within the same form? Like you're setting the cookie value in that same exact form and having
No.
it load something moments later?
No, the page 1 places the cookie. Page 2 has got the form on it, and then uses the cookie value to load the dropdown.
That just seems odd to me that you would not have a cookie value at that point in time. If it's a completely separate page that's being loaded after you set the cookie value, it works in a sequential order. So that cookie value should always be present if you had set it.
Most, if you have, what I found is, I'm calling it actually not from 2 pages, technically. I'm actually calling it from one tab to another. And so that I think is a slightly different use case, because if you have it on page 1 to page 2, yes, totally agree, and it's fine. But in this case, it's really 2 forms on the same page, using the tab. So go from tab 1 to tab 2.
And are you reinitializing the form after it goes to tab 2?
Reinitializing the form, it's a separate form, so it's getting initialized on load, if that answers your question.
But you can also set it to initialize once you get to that tab, and that's probably what you need, I think, based on what I'm hearing. Yeah,
I agree. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking, after you load it, do a reinitialize of the form, use that action, because then it'll reload everything on it. And at that point, your cookie should be existing.
I will give that a try, and I will report back to you. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Yeah. I think Jim was going to add something in.
I was going to make a comment about checking for the existence of the cookie before we discovered about the moving from tab to tab, and as you say, setting it to only initialize the form when you move to the tab seems like a better answer. If it doesn't work, then I can share my thoughts.
Cool. Don, it looks like you're ready to jump in.
While I was listening to Ben and Jim with that last question, I'm sorry, Ben and Matt with that last question, I was in that form that I was asking about just a minute ago, in the grid. So 2 questions. First, am I putting the condition in the right field? There's a field and there's a cell availability, and I'm wondering, a field condition and a cell condition, and then enable conditionally. I'm not sure which one. I thought it was the cell condition that I would put the test in, so that it would not try to write the code that I've got in the HTML template.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at a single column and there's cases in the column where you want the value to appear and cases where you don't want it to appear, then you should use the cell condition.
Got it. That's what I thought. Okay. So
Yeah.
so I put in the syntax that we talked about where the, token field name not equals and then single quotes, so quote, and went through and there's, I don't know, 8 different file IDs that are listed per row. So I put it in each field, ran it again, get all of the same errors. And again, I get like 300 or 400 each time the thing runs. So apparently that syntax is not working. So the frustration here is, try and try and try again. Is there some place that says, yeah, this is what you actually do with a null integer to test if it is not null? So I'm not now. I went and looked again while listening to the conversation. I just did a quick Google search on JavaScript conditional statements for null and saw that if you have a variable, you could say just not variable name, and that translates. But I thought that a token translates not into it's not considered a variable, but actually it replaces it with the value. So what exactly does that turn into? And so
what's the exact error message that is coming up?
File identifier. Let me I have to back out of here just to say the field, the parameter that you pass with getLink is called file identifier, and the error is file identifier. And I got lots of them to read. Parameter file identifier had no value at my tokens core tokens get file link.
So
a lot
Don,
more.
I'll say that I don't think you're alone in seeing that error message a lot. That is I've witnessed that as well on some of my test sites, and I have another client that is seeing that error message a lot, and it's been a little bit hard to track down. But I do think that if you had a scenario where like if you I'm trying to think of so if you had a simple scenario where you could test, I think that the logic we gave you is right, but I'm not. There might be some other thing going on there. So, but I do think that logic should keep a value from showing in the cell, but it's entirely possible that the token is actually running, even though it's keeping a value from actually just being displayed in the cell, but maybe the token is actually running. So that's a possibility.
Okay,
But I think we need more investigation. Go ahead, Ben. Yeah, you have.
no, I was just gonna say, when you said filing, that just like gave me a little bit of extra information there. So you are, for example, in the cell using the file get link token and passing the file ID to it. But then what you're doing is you're putting a conditional statement in that cell saying that if there is no file ID, don't display it, correct?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
The
So-
file, the field in the listing is a field that's coming right out of a SQL statement. So it's one of the fields that are returned in the SQL statement. And the first one's called result PDF. So that field, and in fact, I was just thinking it's probably smart to just show what that is. So that's what's in the HTML. I just put it in the chat. And so it's fairly, I think, straightforward. So what I want is I don't want that to run, because if that runs, it gets the error. So my thought was that, or my understanding was that if the cell condition, which is, token result PDF not equal, quote, quote, then it would not continue on to try to run that code, and therefore would not get an error.
So, correct. That is going to continue to run regardless, because your conditional statement is not stopping what's there from running, it's stopping what's there from displaying.
Yeah,
There's a
that's what I was saying.
difference.
Yep.
So the
Yes,
code is still
okay.
going to run. Now, that being said, I actually do have my own get link click token, and I could tweak it really quickly so that it does a test for a blank value, and if it's a blank value, return a blank value as well. Won't cause an error. It'll be a graceful exit, so to speak, in which case I'll send you that my token that you can import, and then you use that in replace of the one that's built in, and you won't have that issue because it'll still run. It'll just going to return to you a quote and put that into your href, which is not going to cause any errors, and then it'll just hide itself regardless.
That'd be excellent. I've done the same thing, created my own token, but I'd really like to see what in the token that you created. So that would
I'll
be
send it in just a
excellent.
minute.
Yeah.
So just so that I'm clear, and of course, thank you very much for that, for sending that in advance. Thank you for sending that. And if I understand correctly, I could write a tiny bit of Razor script or something that does a test first and then calls the standard get link if the test is successful, otherwise returns the at least a blank, but it returns it without the error. That's the concept. So I would go into my tokens and in other situations, general situations like this, because it seems like it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the system works, which every time this happens to me, it shakes the confidence, So good to understand it. Eventually, maybe I'll understand it all. But it's good to know that a cell condition, it's not what it says it is. It's what I thought happens is it doesn't run, but you're saying yes, it does in fact run. So that makes a lot of sense.
While we were waiting, or while you guys were talking, I tried that reevaluate conditions, and yes, it does. In this, I've got a couple of cases, but in this particular case where I'm going from tab A to tab B, if on tab A I force I had the reevaluate conditions on in tab B, but that's still getting the error. But then if I put it in tab A, the parent tab, if you would, then it does eliminate the error. So thank you.
Cool. Excellent.
Real-time solutions today.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any thoughts about the file get link?
Just that I have a similar situation, but what I do is I condition the display of that of his HTML is my solution. I have a token that I test for an empty, and if it's empty, I just don't display the text, which sounds like what Ben's token does too. So it might be the same thing.
Sounds similar.
Same solution.
Yes. This next idea is a pretty long stretch, but possibly you could create the document in advance and have it be like there is a blank pre-existing document, and then you can still create the document and overwrite it. But then it would always be there. There would always be something there.
In the form, you're saying to always create a file, whether they upload it or not.
Yeah.
And you'll always have something, and the test would always work. Okay.
Yeah. I like the other solutions better, but that's a fallback position, I think.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That also helps in terms of explaining to the client, the manager who's looking at that grid. The assumption is if there's no number there on the display, then they didn't upload a file for that category of file upload. That would give an opportunity of some kind of a quick little tiny message or something saying they didn't do it, as opposed to assuming that it wasn't an error.
There you go. It's an opportunity.
Turn it into an opportunity. Exactly. Lemons, lemonade.
As we're exploring the limits of what possible answers might be, another thing we've done is to write that piece of HTML in at the SQL level when you're doing the select, and applying the if the file doesn't exist, don't write the HTML actually in the SQL. But then, as we've commented, if you put your logic in too many different places, it becomes difficult to manage. But that is another way of doing it.
Yeah, I have another example of that, of putting the SQL result. When we build a PDF, we test if some values are, if the value is set to yes or no in SQL, then create a select tag in SQL as the return, so that you get the little dots, radio button dots kind of thing. So yes, putting in the SQL would be an idea too. But again, the big revelation for me is that it's not doing what I thought it was doing. It's I need to remember that the cell condition stops the display, but doesn't stop the processing to create the display.
Just so you know, I posted an export of the token in chat. Should be able to copy and paste that. That's a simple Razor script. All it's basically doing is same exact thing as your file get link. This one, I called it my file because you can't have the same namespace. But you pass it a file ID. The system is going to check for two things. Number one, that the file ID you pass is not blank, which is a null, which is what you would get if you had a null value in SQL. Your field would be quote, quote. It's also checking to make sure that it's numeric. So if you pass in something that is not numeric, it's also going to fail out and return a quote, quote. So right. If you don't pass in a numeric file ID, you're just going to get back quote, quote, and that's it. If you pass it something that is valid, then it's going to go ahead and do the generation of that link click value and return that instead.
Got it.
And also,
I must say we have very different understandings of the word simple.
It's something that I learned also that Ben has shown in this example he sent, is that you can't use the common syntax for tokens. You can't use the get link token in a Razor script. You have to actually call the .NET Nuke method directly, and that's you can see he did that in his token here. He called the common.globals.linkClick method. So similar, but as you might expect, more complex than what than what I did.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to trying to to figure out how to make that work and then test it out.
Thanks, Ben.
Anytime.
Okay. We'll go back in just a minute, but I want to make sure that I do one thing before we move on, and that is just put a little plug in for the upcoming Low Code Cafe. So in the upcoming Low Code Cafe, I think some of you have heard, but I want to make sure I mention it. We're going to talk about AI, and we're going to show you some ways that we are looking at integrating AI into the product, and then show you a product that we're actually creating based on our integrations. So it should be pretty exciting. It's going to be mostly Bogdan, and I really hope that you all can join, because I think it'll be a really cool Low Code Cafe, and that's this coming week on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So I just wanted to put that plug out there. So having said that, if you have any questions about it, yeah, go ahead.
Are we on a weekly schedule or a bi-weekly schedule?
Bi-weekly for Low Code Cafe, weekly still for Campfire.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. Any other items that anybody wants help with today? Or anything to discuss? Any other ideas on anything we've talked about? While I'm waiting for somebody to say something really clever, I'm going to make sure that I, even though I have access to chat afterwards, but I'm gonna copy what Ben just sent and paste it somewhere else.
Yeah, I have a lot of little utilities like that.
Okay, well, I don't think I saw any new feature requests. Let me just double check that here, but I believe that we are. Yep, so still the most current one I think we've talked about already was been posted on April 28th. Anybody have any ghost stories they'd like to share? So anything that that they had to dive deep into the product and discovered over the past week. I have a slight one that I'll share that I dealt with a client this week that she had some people coming to her and saying that this is broken, and we started diving deep, and it was an API call, a server request to a third party, and we were trying to troubleshoot it, and finally it came down to we said, well, let's actually output the content of the server request we're sending and then actually test it in their API test. And what we discovered was we finally got down to the nitty gritty is that it was the data being passed into the API call, and there was a limitation on one field. Not everything was broken. It was just a specific scenario where the data being passed to the API went beyond their character limit. So it was kind of a really roundabout way to get to that conclusion. But just a thought I'll put out there is that it's always good to question whether there's not actually something broken, but it's just the data itself. So that was a scenario that I had this week. Anybody else? Great. Well, I think we can go ahead and move towards adjourning. So I thank you, everybody, for joining today, and thank you for all the excellent conversation. It's always nice when I get have to take Dale's place. That it's nice when everybody keeps the conversation flowing. We certainly did that today, so thank you very much. And join us next week at the same time. Happy low coding, everybody. And I'll go ahead and pause the recording, and we'll move into the afterglow. Yes.